Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
My name is Aman Singh. I'm the MLA for Richmond, Queensborough. I'm here today with the Minister of State, Bowen Ma, my colleagues, MLA Yao from Richmond South Centre, MLA Green from Richmond Steveston. I want to acknowledge that we're gathered here today on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. With us today is Chief Wayne Sparrow of the Musqueam Indian Band. Chief Ken Baird of the Sawasan First Nation is also joining us. And I'd like to thank the Richmond Mayor Malcolm Brodie for hosting us today at Richmond City Hall. We're also joined by Delta Mayor George Harvey. We'll hear from both mayors shortly. With me to make today's announcement is Rob Fleming, BC's Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, and our Minister of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation, Ravi Kallang, who will also speak. I'd like to initially ask Chief Wayne Sparrow to come here and open up our event.
Siam Siaya Ichwayo Siam Haichka Siam. Good morning. My name's Wayne Sparrow. I'm the elected chief of the Musqueam First Nation. My traditional name is Yakalak. I want to take this opportunity on behalf of my community to welcome each and every one of you here today on this exciting announcement. It's a privilege and honor to be able to stand in front of you as elected chief of the Musqueam First Nation. In our culture and our teachings, going back a long ways, we've always welcomed people into our territory. And I just want to take this opportunity to personally thank Mayor Brodie, Mayor Harvey, for reaching out and making sure when we went through this process that our communities were engaged and involved. It's leadership like that that goes a long ways to helping bridging and working, as I said in the past many times, partnerships and friendships, and where it's beneficial for the communities. So I want to acknowledge my good friend Chief Baird from Tawasin and all dignitaries that are here with us today. It's been a long time coming, and I would just like to close by acknowledging everybody that's put in the hard work. We have a lot of hard work in front of us yet. As you know, Musqueam is a fishing community, and we were very concerned.
Even locally, since 1993. Electors who want to vote by mail should plan to do so early. They should leave enough time for their voter kit to get to them and for them to return it to Elections Canada by Elections Day. They can apply by providing proof of identity and address through our online application system. This is the fastest way to receive a kit, and voters can check online to see if their kit has been issued once they've applied, or if their ballot, once completed, has been received. For those who are not able to apply online, we will have traditional mail-in forms available. Electors who vote by mail are responsible for ensuring that their ballot is returned in time. They should check Canada Post schedules for their region. If they are concerned about their ballot not arriving in time, they can bring it to their polling station on Election Day, or they can have a friend or neighbor bring it. The important thing is that it is brought at a polling station within their electoral district. It's also important to note that by law, electors who apply to vote by mail cannot simply change their mind later on and vote another way. If they have a problem with their kit, if they have not received their kit, they should contact us, and again, we'll find a way to make sure that they can vote, but they cannot simply change their mind. So I encourage electors to plan early and choose the voting option that works best for them. Now, I know that Canadians are used to getting complete results on election night, but it will be different for this election. The count of regular ballots on ordinary polling day and advance polls will be completed on the night of the election as usual. However, the count of mail-in ballots will start after Election Day once all the mail-in ballots that electors have dropped off at polling stations have been returned and integrity checks have been performed. If the volume of mail-in ballots is high, as we've seen in other jurisdictions during the pandemic, it will take longer for returning officers to count those ballots. In most locations, this should be done within 2 days, but in some districts, it could take as long as 5 days, depending on the volume and the distribution. In all cases, the vote can be observed, the count can be observed by candidates from beginning to end, from candidate representatives, and daily result updates will be published. With the changes to the process, getting accurate information about the election has never been so important. Canadians can do their part. By registering and updating your information, you are making sure that you will get a voter information card that will tell you everything you know about where and when to vote. So make sure that you are registered and check to confirm that your information is accurate by visiting elections.ca. Our website also remains your destination for accurate information about the electoral process, including all the safeguards that we have in place to protect the integrity and the safety of the vote. I'd like to end today with a message about supporting electoral democracy. Often this is something that we take for granted, which is perhaps a testimony to the high level of trust that Canadians have in their electoral process. And that's something that we can be proud of. But it's also something that needs to be supported. I invite anyone who wishes to support our electoral process, or is just curious to see how it's done, to come experience an election from the inside just one day. So come and work for us. Be one of more than 200,000 Canadians who work for federal elections to make them a reality. I encourage everyone to take advantage of the election, to get involved, and to vote. Thank you, and I will now answer questions.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you. We will start this time with a reporter in the room before moving on to the teleconference. Rappel, une question et une question de suivi. One question, one follow-up, please, and if we have time, we will start the queue over.
Thank you. It's Bill Curry from the Globe and Mail. You had mentioned before the campaign was official that it could cost more than the usual amount, but now that we're actually into a campaign, can you provide an update on what our election normally costs? What's the latest revision, and what are the drivers of those extra costs?
The cost of elections varies based on a number of factors, including the number of voters, of course, that evolves from election to election. The last election was just over 500, I think it was $506 million. At this point, we estimate that it'll be around $610 million. This is a very unique election. All elections have things that are somewhat unpredictable, so things may change. So I caution about that number. It may evolve depending on the circumstances and things we need to address. But at this point, $612 million is the estimate.
And I'm sure you've seen in the news, there's a lot of debate right now about whether federal public servants whether there should be a mandatory requirement to be vaccinated. Are you imposing any kind of mandatory vaccine order on Elections Canada workers, just the campaign, and if not, why not?
So the measures that we have in place reflect consultations that we had over the last year and continue to have with public health authorities at all levels. These recommendations do not include mandatory vaccination, whether they be for electors, for workers, or candidate representatives. In the next 3 weeks or so, returning officers will be hiring some 250,000 Canadians to work at the polls to serve approximately 18 million Canadians. These are the same Canadians, these are the same people that you meet every day at the grocery store. The difference is that the polls are a controlled environment where safety measures can be applied more rigorously. And if you look back at the last 18 months, we've had elections in Canada provincially, we've had territorial elections, there have been elections around the world, and there has not been outbreaks of COVID as a result of in-person voting. And that, to me, is a testimony of the fact that polling places are a controlled environment where we can apply safety measures in a way that is rigorous and ensure the safety of everyone present in those polls. Of course, we will We will continue to follow the advice and continue to consult with public health authorities, and we will adjust our measures based on their recommendations.
Operator, we can take questions from the teleconference now. On peut passer à la téléconférence.
Thank you. Merci. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. Our first question, Tom Korski, Blacklock's reporter. Your line is open. Actually, they are no longer on the line. So our first question will be Julie Gordon, Reuters. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Yeah, hi there. Thanks for taking our questions. You basically answered what I was looking for, but maybe you could give us a bit more color on, I'm interested in the counting of the mail-in ballots and how you're going to be verifying those. Can you give us a little more detail on that verification process and why that could take up to 5 days?
The verification process will not take up to 5 days. That should be done the day after. Essentially, we are verifying the outer envelope, and there's more technical information available on our website, but essentially we are verifying the information on the outer envelope, which includes a signed declaration by the elector, includes a barcode, and includes the address information to make sure it is the voting kit that we sent to that elector. We're also going to verify that that person is not voted in person. So if somebody walks up on polling day and said, I did not receive my mail-in kit, that person will swear an oath to that effect and will be allowed to vote in person. We will be able to check to make sure that that is true and set aside any outer envelope from the mail-in ballots that matches the voters' information at the polls. So there's a number of controls that take place to make sure we have the postal ballot from the right person and that the person has not voted twice.
Okay, and so then just to clarify, the count takes 5 days, up to 5 days, just based upon the volume of mail-in ballots in a given riding?
Yes, it's important to note that the count is done locally for local electors. So people who vote by mail, electors who vote by mail from their electoral district, their kit will be sent back to their returning office, and that reduces the travel time for the kits and ensures that we minimize the risk of mail-in kits arriving too late. So they're counted locally, and depending on the distribution, we may see more mail-in kits in some districts than others.
Thank you. Next question, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, Joan Bryden, The Canadian Press. Your line is open. À vous la parole. Joan Bryden, your line is open. If you're using a speakerphone, please pick up your handset and mute your line.
Hello. I was actually wanting to ask you again about the why not mandatory vaccinations.
Let me repeat the answer that I gave earlier. As I said, we are applying safety measures that have been discussed with public health authorities across the country at all levels, and will continue to adjust those measures. The recommendations so far do not include making vaccination mandatory. And as I indicated, we are recruiting ordinary Canadians, serving ordinary Canadians, and they will encounter them in locations that are highly controlled, much more controls than the kind of encounters you see at the grocery store every day. So we have good reason, and I think Dr. Tam was quite clear when she spoke not very long ago, I think it was less than a week ago, that it is perfectly safe to vote at a polling place if the proper measures are in place, and that's what we're focusing on.
Is there a follow-up?
A polling place if the proper measures are
yes.
in place.
Hi.
That's what we're focusing on.
I was wondering then if you could. You said that thus far you're not getting recommendation to require mandatory vaccinations. Might you then do that, and how difficult would that be? Sort of midway through a campaign, when you're recruiting poll workers, to then say, "Oops, you all need to be fully vaccinated."
Yes, obviously, it becomes more challenging as we go forward. However, vaccination rates are high, and we have every reason to think that our poll workers will be at least as vaccinated as the general population. So a large number of the poll workers will, in fact, be vaccinated.
Thank you. Next question. Prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, Evan Dyer, CBC. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Hi, good morning. I wonder if you could just talk about some of the natural hazards and obstacles to voting, such as floods, wildfires, and so on. For example, the wildfire situation in BC right now. What provisions would you anticipate making if wildfires drove people to evacuate their homes, for example, move to a new riding? What kinds of things could you do or have you done in the past?
So this is something that, unfortunately, we do encounter practically at every election, whether it's floodings or storms or fires. We obviously follow that very closely across the country and monitor the evolution of fires or other national disasters and look at where people are being evacuated where that's the case. There's a range of measures that we can take and we've taken in the past, and that includes, for example, the last election in Manitoba, we had a special polling locations for people who are evacuated in Winnipeg. And so it's relatively easy to do, especially when people are evacuated in a particular hotel or area where they're all present and they can vote from outside their district in a manner that really resembles what they would do in their home district. Otherwise, we can use vote by mail. So we're in contact with the authorities and we follow what's happening. And as the situation evolves in the election, we'll adapt services to make sure that there are voting options for every Canadian.
Thanks. And you also are conducting this election with a new federal law bill, well, it was Bill C-30, now federal law, on disinformation, deliberate attempts to mislead the electorate. How many people or what kind of resources, if any, are you devoting during the campaign to looking for violations of that law? Or is this sort of a complaints-based system? Is it something that you only look at after the voting is done? Can you just talk about how that new law has affected your operations in practice?
So the provision is a variation on a provision that existed in the past. There's an element of intent that was clarified in the legislation, but certainly the provision is not entirely new. And it captures a very specific number of instances of disinformation that is prohibited, including disinformation on certain aspects of the party leaders. This is essentially, as you indicated, a complaints-based process, and the complaints should be made to the Commissioner of Canada Elections. The Commissioner is responsible for investigating violations of the Act, and he does so independently from the Chief Electoral Officer. So if people have instances that they believe is in violation of that provision, they should inform the Commissioner.
Thank you. Next question. Prochaine question.
Thank you. Our next question, la prochaine question, Tom Perry, CBC News. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Oh, hi. Thanks for taking my question. I'm just trying to figure out if you could sort of paint a picture what it's going to look like for Canadians who do go to the polls on voting day. What's going to be different for them compared to previous elections?
At the poll itself, they can expect to see essentially the kind of measures that they now have been seeing for the last 18 months. So we will have people in charge of ensuring that the place is clean, that the electors are properly distanced. They will see, for example, these physical transparent barriers that will separate the poll workers that will service them to allow them to vote. There will be masks. If Canadians do not have a mask, we will offer masks. We've purchased a very, very large number of masks. And, of course, hand sanitizing lotions and disposable pencils. And as I indicated earlier, anyone who wants to bring their pen or pencil is welcome to do that. So basically what they will see is the same kind of measures that you would have seen in a grocery store, but in a very controlled environment. And so that is an important aspect of the safety of the in-person voting.
Just from a security point of view, given the number of mail-in ballots that you're anticipating in this election, what measures are you putting in place to ensure that we don't see people voting, say, by mail-in, but also trying to cast a ballot on voting day?
Yeah, so when an elector applies to vote by mail, their name is automatically struck off the list. So the lists that are used on polling day or advanced polls have names that are struck, and these are people who've requested a voting kit. If somebody wishes to vote on polling day and their name is struck, they'll have to explain why, and if they've lost their ballot, if it's been misplaced, or if they've not received it, then they will swear an oath, and they will be marked as having voted in person and as having received a special ballot. These records will then be used the next day to verify against all of the mail-in ballots that we do not have either two mail-in ballots by a single person or a mail-in ballot by someone who has voted in person. So these controls are made after polling day in the presence of candidate representatives, and that's why we're taking the time in this election, because of the volumes, to make sure it's done properly with observers present.
Thank you. Next question. Prochaine question.
Thank you. Our next question. La prochaine question, Ray Chan from Sing Tao Daily. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Yeah, and you just mentioned that there will be a much more higher percentage of mail-in voting. Can you specific how many percentage in the past and what prediction in this election?
So we have been conducting surveys over the last year. For most of the year, the survey results we've been getting are fairly consistent at between 4 and 5 million. Just before the call of the election, the number was lower. It was between 2 and 3 million. I expect this could go back up again, so it's not entirely predictable. But we have kits for more than 5 million voters. That's for sure. In the past, just by way of comparison, we would get approximately 50,000 electors nationally, 50,000 who would vote locally by mail. So it's quite a dramatic change. We've had to, of course, increase our capacity quite significantly to deal with such an increase in postal voting.
Thank you. Is there a follow-up?
And that's okay. Thanks a lot.
Merci. Prochaine question. Next question.
Thank you. Our next question, Tom Korski from Blacklock's Reporter. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Thank you, Mr. Pro. Are you laying out more than 4 advanced polls?
I'm sorry, I misheard that question.
I beg your pardon. Are you laying out more than 4 advanced polls?
So there are 4 days of advanced polls that are provided in the legislation, and that's the service that we'll be offering, if I understood your question correctly. So it's the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday of the weekend that precedes polling day.
So it's statutory then. My other question, I want to clarify, I'm not looking for trouble, but I want to clarify the mask business. Your authorities make it clear that local health authority rules would apply. But I'm not going to a liquor store. I'm exercising my franchise. I understand there will be free masks and everyone is reasonable. But if I have asthma or I'm a civil libertarian, whatever, I cannot be denied, and you will not deny me my ballot if I choose not to be masked and I'm 6 feet away from everyone else, correct?
Well, you have to be careful here. I think electors have a responsibility, whether it's by personal choice or even for medical reasons. Now, there are medical exemptions, but they should plan their vote. And if you do not intend to vote with a mask, I would encourage you to vote by mail. Now, if you have a medical exception and you've not been able to vote with a mask, to vote by mail, in advance, and you have a medical reason not to wear a mask, then you will not be denied the right to vote. But if it's just a matter of personal choice and the mask is mandatory in the jurisdiction in which you're voting, then we will apply those rules.
Thank you. Next question. Prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, our next question, Raphaël Pirot, Agence QMI. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour. Je voulais savoir, peut-être que c'est pas à vous de répondre à cette question-là nécessairement, mais je voulais savoir, en raison de la pandémie, est-ce que vous attendez à recevoir au total, que ce soit en personne, que ce soit par la poste, est-ce que vous attendez à recevoir moins de votes qu'à l'habitude?
C'est une question qui est très difficile à répondre. Effectivement, nous, notre rôle, c'est de s'assurer que les gens aient des opportunités de voter, qu'on offre des occasions de voter qui soient sécuritaires. Pour ce qui est de la participation, du taux de participation, évidemment, on la souhaite toujours élevé, mais ça dépend de bien des facteurs, et la plupart de ces facteurs-là sont de nature politique. Donc, la motivation des électeurs à voter, ce n'est pas quelque chose qui est vraiment du ressort d'administration électorale. Nous, notre rôle, c'est de s'assurer qu'on a des mécanismes qui sont accessibles, qui sont bien compris pour permettre aux gens de voter. Alors, on a vu au fil des ans des taux variés. On a vu dans la dernière année, il y a eu des élections. Dans certains cas, ça a été un peu moins qu'à l'habitude. Mais c'est très difficile, même après le coup, d'identifier là, un facteur pour expliquer la participation.
D'accord. Et donc, si j'ai bien compris, là, pour changer de sujet, il me semble que j'ai entendu pendant le brefage tantôt que c'était difficile d'aller recruter des gens pour l'élection actuelle. Il y aurait des difficultés à ce niveau-là. Peut-être que, je ne sais pas si vous pouvez confirmer ça, expliquer un peu pourquoi, si c'est le cas.
Écoutez, on est au début du recrutement. Ce que je peux dire, c'est qu'on a besoin, dans la dernière élection, on recherchait à avoir autour de 250 000 personnes. C'est le cas aussi cette fois-ci. La dernière fois, on a réussi à en recruter 232 000. Donc, c'est toujours un défi, évidemment, dans une courte période. À l'absence d'une élection à date fixe, on ne peut pas recruter à l'avance, les gens ne sachant pas quel jour ils seraient demandés pour venir travailler. Et donc, ce sont des facteurs qui, on peut s'attendre à certains défis, mais on va voir au fil des prochains jours, des semaines, là, comment va le recrutement. Encore là, comme je l'ai dit, j'invite tous les Canadiens à prendre une journée. Je pense que c'est une très belle expérience de prendre une journée pour contribuer à la démocratie. Évidemment, il y a rémunération en plus, mais de voir comment ça se passe, je pense que c'est une expérience unique et ceux qui veulent participer, n'hésitez pas à communiquer avec nous. On a certainement du travail pour vous.
Merci. Prochaine question. Next question.
Merci. Thank you. Our next question, Sarah Turnbull, CTV News. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Hi there. Will the cost of rapid test kits be considered a campaign expense that will count against a candidate's spending cap?
So campaigns that purchase kits or protective equipment, these are material that are expenses under the Act. They are reimbursable, but they are subject to the overall limit for candidates and political parties. So it is a reimbursable election expense if it is used during the campaign as part of the campaign activities.
Thanks.
Was there a follow-up?
No, thanks.
Merci. Prochaine question. Next question.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, Karina Roman, CBC News. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Yes, hello. I just want to clarify numbers. When you talk about how many special mail-in ballots we've had before locally versus what you're expecting now, that didn't include that 50,000 you quoted. That didn't include, people out of the country and Canadian Armed Forces and prisoners, right? Because the number we got in the technical briefing was different. I just want to be very clear about what the number is in terms of a normal election versus now, not just local versus local.
Yeah, so overall the number, I'm looking at my colleague, is around 250,000, something like that. That includes some 35,000 Canadians abroad, and of course military and a range of other special ballots, national electors who are voting away from their electoral district. So the 50,000 figure that I gave was only for electors who are in their electoral district and vote by mail. Michel?
I will clarify. 50,000 electors is the total number of electors who voted by mail. So it does include an estimate of 5,000 who voted inside their electoral districts, but the vast majority were expat voters or absentee electors outside of their electoral districts. But those are those who voted by mail. The vast majority of electors who voted by special ballot at the last election did vote in person at points of services. for Elections Canada. The current election will be different. We'll have more vote by mails.
Okay, so the global figure is actually 50,000, and now we're expecting millions. Just to clarify, that's not my follow-up, but.
Yeah, so postal ballots are a species of what we call special ballots, and they're used for different categories of electors, including, as you mentioned, the military, for example. So as Mr. Rousset explained, 50 includes all mail-in, which included 5,000 local mail-in, and the balance is either national or 35,000 from abroad. That's the figure at the last election.
Okay, thank you. So my follow-up question is, since it's going to take some time to count these quite a few more million that you're expecting, what is your thoughts on the impact that will mean on when we might know who a winner is?
Well, again, there's a fair amount of uncertainty. As I said, first of all, in terms of the total number, our surveys have varied between 2 to 3 million to 4 and 5 million, so that's different. It depends on the distribution. These votes will not necessarily be distributed equally amongst electoral districts, so that will impact the duration of the counting process. And finally, the margin of victory will be a key factor. If it's a very tight race and there's a large number of postal ballots, then it can take a few days to find out who's the actual winner.
Thank you. Next question. Prochaine question.
Thank you. Our next question, David Common. Please state your media and go ahead with your question. À vous la parole.
Yes, thank you very much. It's David Common with CBC News. Mr. Perot, I just, given that this is not your first go-around with an election, when you list off the various changes and measures that you have to take place for this election, can you put that in context about how this election will be different from all those others that you've known?
Well, I would say every election is unique in a number of ways, but this one may be a bit more unique than others. I mean, the first thing that stands out, of course, is the postal vote, which we haven't known in such large numbers in the past. We do expect whatever the number to be significantly larger than before. And that also impacts the count. I think for Canadians, having final results in all electoral districts on the night of the election is something that they're used to. So that's a very different experience for Canadians if that's not the case in a number of electoral districts. And the other thing I would mention from the point of view of electors, it's the polling locations. At this point, we are in the process of finalizing the polling locations. Returning officers have been working extremely hard across the country to find proper polling locations, but we know that it's not easy, and we know that some locations will be farther away. We know that some locations will not be the usual ones or may not be accessible. So these are unfortunate circumstances, but we will do everything that we can to make the vote as accessible as is possible. So that's an illustration of some of the challenges we'll be facing that are perhaps unique in this election.
And Mr. Perot, in terms of the count, a number of my colleagues are asking about that, but given that you could have somewhere in the order of 1 out of every 4 ballots cast being sent to the central office, what measures do you have to take differently this year, this election, in order to count them?
Just want to clarify, because it's an important point, that the vast majority of the postal votes will not go to the central place in Ottawa. They will be sent locally. So any elector voting in their electoral district by mail, their ballot will be issued locally and returned to the local returning officer or brought back at the poll, as the case may be. But the local aspect is important because it does reduce significantly the travel time for the kits to go back and forth to the elector and back to returning officers in order to reduce the number of votes that arrive late. Now, in terms of answering directly your questions, certainly the returning officers and their teams have had to look at larger locations to store the kits, to have counting processes in the kits, counting process after election day. And this will be a new experience for them, counting such large numbers locally in the presence of candidate representatives.
Merci. Prochaine question. Thank you. Next question.
Once again, please press star 1 if you have a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. Our next question, Andy Saint-André, TVA Nouvelle. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour M. Perrault. J'aimerais vous entendre en français un petit peu. Désolé, je risque de vous faire répéter parce que vous avez répondu en anglais. Là. Essentiellement, au niveau du vote par la poste, comment vous allez vous assurer que les Canadiens vont seulement voter une fois, c'est-à-dire que certains ne seront pas en mesure finalement de déjouer le processus en place, de voter par la poste, se rendre aussi dans un bureau de vote le jour de l'élection?
Oui, alors c'est une bonne question, c'est une question importante et les gens doivent être confiants qu'on a les contrôles en place pour éviter ça. Alors, l'électeur qui demande une trousse de vote par la poste va, lors de la demande, lorsqu'elle est reçue, va avoir son nom qui est rayé. Et donc, sur les listes qui apparaissent soit au vote par anticipation, soit au vote régulier, chaque électeur qui a demandé une trousse va avoir le nom rayé. Il se peut qu'un électeur se présente et dise qu'il n'a pas reçu ou que sa trousse a été détruite. Alors, il y a des circonstances exceptionnelles et on va donc permettre à cet électeur-là de prêter serment à l'effet qu'il n'a pas déjà voté et de lui permettre de voter en personne. Mais on va, le lendemain de l'élection, c'est là que le dépouillement va se faire et pour cette raison-là, du vote postal, on va être en mesure de comparer les enveloppes reçues avec les noms qui apparaissent comme étant rayés sur la liste et les gens qui ont prêté serment comme n'ayant pas voté 2 fois. Donc, il y a tout un travail de contre-vérification qui est fait avant même de procéder au dépouillement. Et s'il y a des enveloppes qui sont identifiées comme parvenant d'électeurs qui ont déjà voté, alors ces enveloppes-là vont être écartées et mises de côté. Et ça, c'est un processus qui se fait le lendemain de l'élection, en présence des représentants des candidats. Donc, on s'assure qu'il y aura une présence, une observation possible par les candidats pour tout le processus, y incluant la vérification pour les cas possibles là, de double vote.
Parfait. Est-ce que je peux y aller avec une sous-question?
Bien sûr.
Génial. Un petit peu dans la même veine, vous avez dit tout à l'heure 2 à 5 jours, là, de ce que j'ai compris en tout cas en anglais, 2 à 5 jours pour compter les votes par correspondance. Ça sera double vérifié, triple vérifié, j'imagine. Donc, les gens, inévitablement, ne doivent pas s'attendre à un résultat comme ça le soir même là, du jour de l'élection. Ça prendra des jours par la suite pour vraiment confirmer le gouvernement qui sera en place. Vous avez parlé tout à l'heure des endroits qui étaient difficiles à trouver et qu'on planche l'actu actuellement. Ça pourrait être assez éloigné. Est-ce que vous êtes quand même confiant d'en trouver suffisamment et que les gens vont se déplacer ou vous misez vraiment par la poste? Quel est, disons, le pourcentage, là, pour simplifier ma question, de gens que vous pensez qui vont voter par la poste versus les gens qui vont se déplacer?
Alors, je peux vous dire là, qu'à date, sur 16 000 lieux de scrutin, approximativement, on a 12 000 qui sont confirmés. On est satisfait là, on va pouvoir avoir des lieux qu'on connaît. Sur le 4 000, on a des lieux alternatifs d'identifier qui sont en train d'être identifiés. Donc, on a quand même un bon travail qui a été fait par les directeurs de scrutin. Dans bien des cas, ça va être les mêmes lieux qu'à l'habitude, mais pas toujours. Et donc, il se peut, dans certains cas, que ça soit plus loin ou dans des endroits qui pourraient paraître inhabituels, comme un hôtel, par exemple, une salle de réunion dans un hôtel. Donc, les gens doivent se familiariser avec cette information-là quand ils reçoivent leur carte d'information d'électeur, s'assurer que ce lieu-là convient pour eux. S'il y a des enjeux d'accessibilité, qu'ils examinent ça attentivement pour qu'ils puissent voter de la bonne façon. Et si ça convient pas pour eux, il y a des possibilités des fois de certificat de transfert, mais on peut aussi voter par la poste. Donc, les électeurs devront porter attention, à l'information qu'ils reçoivent sur leur carte d'information de l'électeur.
Merci. Prochaine question. Next question.
Thank you. Merci. The last question, Cormac McSweeney, City News. Your line is open. À vous la parole.
Yes, I'm just wondering if you could confirm what happens if somebody does decide to vote twice. They send in a mail-in ballot and then they show up in person. Are both of those ballots then, spoiled ballots and destroyed and not counted? And what is the consequence for somebody who purposely decides to do that? Are there penalties that they will face as a result?
Yes. So two things. Once the ballot, the regular ballot, is in the ballot box, of course, you can't trace it back to the elector, but that person's name has been struck from the list, which is why we're retaining all the postal ballots where there's an outer envelope that we can match to the elector and set that envelope aside if the elector is struck from the list as having voted. So the vote that will be set aside will be the postal vote, and any instance of double vote will be referred to the Commissioner of Canada Elections for his consideration and investigation. There are serious offences under the Act for attempting to vote twice.
And you're expecting millions of people to vote by mail this time. You say, electors should use the appropriate time frame to make sure that it's in on election day so that it can be counted. Do you have any timeline for that? If people are listening right now, this may be the only time they really pay attention to this. So yes. How far in advance should they be sending this in via mail? Are you talking 7 days, 10 days? What would be an appropriate time frame to make sure that it does get in and it does get counted?
So I think thank you for that question. The deadline, if you're voting from outside of your electoral district, is it has to be back in Ottawa at 6 o'clock on polling day. If you're casting your ballot by mail in your electoral district, it has to be in by close of polls at the local returning office or brought to any polling location on polling day in your electoral district. So an elector who has doubt, they've got their special ballot kit, they've received it, but it's late in the campaign, they should check, first of all, Canada Post. They have information about schedules. And of course, the time it takes will vary depending on where you are in Canada. It's a very, as we all know, very vast country, and so it can vary significantly. So take the time to check what is the approximate time, and if you fear that it is too tight, then a good option for you is to bring it either directly to the office of the returning officer or wait on polling day to bring it to a local polling station anywhere in your electoral district, and you can ask a friend or relative to bring it for you.
Thank you for listening today, and thank you for supporting us with our sponsors. Please go to depictions.media for more information and click on our contact link and let us know how we can help bring your story and help bring us to a better world. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.